I was fairly early on in my career, and I was experiencing those feelings of overwhelm and anxiousness. And at that time, we didn't even have really a language for that. So we didn't really talk about anxiety. I didn't even know that was a thing. For me, success was getting A grades. That was sort of my measure of success, was like getting those grades and feeling that sort of sense of achievement, I suppose.
Those absolute elite sports people, to have that kind of discipline, to literally achieve at that level, like almost everything has to go.
Really, rather than looking at someone's CV, if we're recruiting for a role, we shouldn't be looking for who's the most qualified, who's got the best grades, who's had the best career. What we should really be looking at is
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Roots to Roots. This is dedicated to exploring what we can understand about our modern culture. By investigating the moments that happened in our previous generations, we can start to explore what impact that has on ourself, our identity, and the things that we're driven to do. And today, I actually have two guests on the show, and they are both dedicated to finding a way that people can thrive in the future of the work that they do. So, I'd like to welcome Dan and Anwen.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having us, Anand.
If I would like to begin to understand the people sat in front of me, so what drives them, where would I start?
Do you want to start?
What drives us? I think that's a really great question, and I've reflected on that for myself recently. So when I look back over a 20-year corporate career in retail, so running some of the biggest Currys PC World stores in the country and in London. So got quite far in that career, and then leaving that to do something a bit different. So I did a year in recruitment and then started my first business. So I've always had that sense of drive. And I think it's really difficult actually to pinpoint where it comes from. I think we've talked about off camera about Stephen Bartlett and how he talks about, are you being driven or dragged?
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not being dragged. That's one thing I can say for sure. But then why I was so fascinated to come on your podcast is that I can look to my grandfather on my mother's side, who built his own insurance company after literally leaving the Navy at 16 and starting as a tea boy in an old British bank called Ree Brothers. And that's where he started literally, making teas and then worked his way up. So I think there's some genetics involved. But also, as I've been involved with Anwen in our this new company called Thrivall, which is essentially proactive workplace, mental health, wellbeing, and peak performance psychology. We've kind of really dug into kind of mindset, positive psychology, and so I can definitely see ADHD traits in my neurodiversity. I like to try and speak. I speak openly about recognizing low-level manic depression. Okay, and I use that in a really low-level way because I can't speak to suffering as some do from very severe depression or from extreme mania, like perhaps Stephen Fry, if you know his story. And so, in recognizing those traits, I think you can also join the dots in a neurodiversity way in terms of where that drive comes from, because and it's really interesting listening to more and more people talk about ADHD, not as I've got ADHD, I can't do, as a much more around, I've got ADHD. That's really helpful to explain some things, right? And like I say again, I'm just in. There's no official diagnosis. It's just when you read the list and you go, there's a lot of familiarity here, right? And everything I do, I like to do my best. So it's really it's a great question, and I'm formulating my my opinion as I'm speaking to you. So I think it can be a number of things, right? So, I look to my dad's side of the family, and again they were, my grandmother was quite a successful librarian, and by that I mean she used to open up libraries all over the country and within schools. My dad was a professional musician back in the late 60s, 70s in Quebec City for 8 years. So again, taking that kind of thing. So uncles who my auntie's husband on my dad's side, very successful managing director in manufacturing, and saw him and his career go all the way through. And then back to my mum's side, just as my grandfather was building that company, he had a much younger brother-in-law, as in my grandmother's brother, and he 16 years younger. Now, he got kicked out of school at 14 and was told he was never going to make anything of himself, absolute waster. My grandfather gave him an introduction into the insurance industry, because he was started his company, not in his company. And this is my great uncle, then just became very, very good at account managing, and broking, and started a firm, in the late 80s. Became just made it huge. Essentially became a multi-millionaire, and then got an exit from that business probably 5 years ago in his late 60s with his business partner. I think it was 130 odd million. So you kind of start joining the dots, right? And seeing, I'm surrounded by this kind of stuff. I think maybe there's some of that in it, but I think it's really difficult to put a finger on it, right? Or difficult to kind of say. I think one thing I'm very fortunate to have is a comfort and a comfortability in my own skin, and I suppose a self-love, which probably people don't talk enough about, and I've been with the same woman and married for 25 years. I've got 2 wonderful children. I've got these wonderful friends and network around me. So, extremely grateful life. If I was, desperately insecure and being dragged, I'd be telling you that as well, but that's just not the case. So I hope that's given you some time to think about.
Yes. So, what drives me? I often say that I'm driven by 2 questions. I like questions, and curiosity is one of our core values, and learning. And so, I think I'm driven by asking myself the questions, where is the joy and where is the love? And so I'm always looking for ways to enjoy what I'm doing, to do work that I love, to work with other people that love what they do, and to help other people find the joy and the love in what they do. I made a decision when I started out that I would always do work that I loved. So I started off working in theatres, and when I was at uni, and just all the way growing up, I was always involved with performing, doing shows, dancing. I did ballet from the age of 3 and all different sorts of dancing. So I was always on the stage and performing, and that was just quite natural for me. And I, at one point, thought I might pursue performing as a career. But then I thought, because I was also academic, that I would actually do an academic course. And I think I felt like I always wanted stability, financial stability. And I just saw other people who were going into the performing arts and saw how unstable that was as a career choice. So I thought, okay, now I'll pursue academic study, and that will just give me a foundation that hopefully will stand me in good stead. And that kind of came naturally to me as well. I've always found it very easy to study and to do academic stuff. So when I graduated, I thought, right, I'm either now going to go into publishing because I love books, journalism because I liked writing and reporting and research, or theatre because I loved theatre and I did a lot of drama kind of as a student. And I applied for various jobs in all of those 3 fields, and then it just so happened that the first job that I was offered was at a theatre, and I did a marketing role. It was a really good kind of entry level kind of general marketing role where I got to do a bit of everything. So I was doing PR, I was doing creating brochures and marketing materials. And it was around the time that the internet was just starting, which makes me sound really old. But I was helping to create websites, and obviously it was way before social media, so that wasn't a thing. And we didn't have email marketing, I don't think. And then, basically 10 years ago, I had my daughter. and I started my own business, so became a marketing consultant on my own, self-employed. And then a couple of years ago, Dan and I started our business together. So yeah, I've just always been driven by doing what I love, working with people who are also very passionate and love what they do. And I heard a stat recently that said 17% of people love their work. So it's a really small percentage. Most people don't like their work, which also correlates with another statistic that we've been learning about, which is from the Gallup polls, which shows that something like 90% of people are not engaged with their work. So I just feel really lucky that I've always had work that I have been engaged with and I have enjoyed. And I guess that's part of my mission with Thrivall. Obviously, you get from the name, it's about everyone thriving. I would really like to see a world where everyone is engaged with their work and does love what they do, because I can see that is possible, because that's been my experience. So I feel very privileged that I've had that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can imagine some people listening in and the ability to kind of pursue the things that you've enjoyed doing is, in some cultures especially, and especially at certain time periods in life, there can be the argument that some people are just not given that same freedom. Yeah, the opportunity, but also the freedom in the cultures they grew up with, where it was, speaking from looking at some of my previous guests, where maybe there was some of that element of drag rather than drive. It comes from the case of maybe they come from a lineage where there were one or two generations of substantial risks taken to build a secure life for the offspring and the children around them. So then they're ingrained with this expectation to follow a certain path where it is considered safer and not necessarily their own dream, in order to make sure that they're fulfilling the expectations of the community that they've grown up in, to not take too much of a risk that puts the sacrifices that the previous generations at stake.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that for other people.
And that's definitely, and of course the other thing of that's not like written on the walls, right? That's all unconscious. That's just like, it's like an unsaid thing, what one presumes. Do you know what I mean? There's no one going, oh, we suffered this for you, so now you just stay in lane. But it is really, I'm, acutely aware of being white, male, British, and essentially from a really privileged upbringing. And it was that then kind of took me to reflect on this. Okay, so I've been around, not wealth, but money. There was nothing we really didn't want for us, my brother and I. And like I say, we weren't, crazy rich or anything like that. Mum was a teacher, Dad was a supervisor at a factory after his music career. But yeah, you just recognise, and then being around, financial advisors, all those kind of things that are brought to you generationally. Why did I introduce, I used my financial advisor for our first mortgage for our first house, which was so useful because my mum used one, right? But most people think that cost you loads of money, so they wouldn't even think about it. But actually, it was a fantastic education. Cost us no more if we didn't. So if you don't know what you don't know, so if you're not around that, then you're not going to be able to tap into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the thing you said about expectations, whether that's from your parents or societal kind of expectations of people around you, I think, I definitely feel privileged that I didn't have any of that put on me. So I was free to make my own decision, and I was able to follow my heart and what I wanted to do. And I recognised that I was lucky in that, and that's not true for everyone.
Do you think you knew that at the time?
I think I had an element of that, but I've probably become more aware of it as I've got older, and with hindsight and sort of more awareness of what other people's experiences are and how that's different from my own.
Did you see how in, again, looking that generation back or the one before, where you could see where that kind of freedom to explore may have came from?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm actually just thinking about it now because you've asked me the question. I haven't really given it a whole lot of thought before. So when I think about it, my parents were or are, I suppose, very supportive. Yeah, like Dan, I've had a very kind of lucky upbringing in that, my parents have been very loving and supportive of my choices. And they've given me that freedom to make my own decisions. but perhaps there's something from my mother's experience that sort of influenced her choice to sort of allow me to take my own course of action. I know that she wanted to study art at college and wasn't given that opportunity, and her parents did kind of push her down a different route.
It was a classic route, wasn't it?
So yeah, she was basically given the option, which I think was kind of quite the norm at that time for women. You either become a teacher or a secretary.
Right.
And she didn't want to go into teaching, so she went to secretarial college, but her choice would have been to go to art college, and that just wasn't the thing. So her parents, my maternal grandmother was a nurse, and my maternal grandfather was British army officer. So they had quite a sort of traditional approach, I guess. So art college just wasn't the thing. Like, that probably would have been a bit too hippie and
no money in it.
yeah, and again, yeah, probably just not going to give you financial security. So yeah, that was something that they didn't encourage her to do. So perhaps that's why she allowed me to take my own path. But yeah, I've never really thought about it.
Yeah, there's this, people who've listened to previous episodes, there's normally a common theme that occurs when people who are raised in a certain culture then decide to break out of the norms in order to pursue something that they're driven by. And that tends to be this battle that they face of weighing up the external expectation that's set on them, whether it's from their friends, community, the people they go around, versus that internal conversation or conflict that they're having with themselves of, I don't quite fit in here and I want to do my own thing. It's very hard to cross the line of making that internal dialogue overtake the external expectation, but the ones that do are the ones that then decide, I'm going to go on to do my own thing.
Because it's authentic. And
exactly.
empowering.
In fact, pretty much all of my friends' mums had careers, and I was unusual in that my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and that's because there was four of us.
I was going to say there were four of you.
But I think also maybe because my mum never found her calling in life, because she wasn't able to follow the path that she would have liked to have done. So she didn't have a qualification or a training in something that kind of pushed her down the route of a career. So yeah, she always wanted to have children. She's very family oriented. So yeah, I think maybe I was unusual in that my mum didn't have a career. So I think those two things definitely have influenced me, is kind of wanting to have independence and earn my own money, and being able to make my own choices in life, and sort of having that expectation from my peer group that that's the norm.
And looking at what you do now, right, it's Thrivall, so it's focused on helping people to thrive, but also tackling a lot of the issues that probably have existed for a lot longer than it's now being made a focus area, but it's good that it is, right? It's the idea of people's mental well-being, physical well-being, picking up on certain conditions, like you said, around ADHD and neurodiversity. Could you pinpoint what led you to really focus in on this is something that you wanted to make a difference in?
Yeah, that is difficult. There's a few things that sort of stand out for me. One story which I tell from my own experience, although I have had a career that's been filled with lots of joy and I love what I do, it's also been at times stressful and quite pressurized kind of environment, like very fast paced, very creative. So working with kind of big personalities, to tight deadlines on tight budget. So there's definitely been a pressure and challenges that come with that. And so there's been times when I have felt overwhelmed or anxious or like I'm struggling to keep up. And so, yeah, I feel like I've been on a journey to kind of understand how to manage myself and how to manage those kind of situations that come up. And I can think of one particular time when I was sort of fairly early on in my career and I was experiencing those feelings of overwhelm and anxiousness. And at that time, we didn't even have really a language for that. So we didn't really talk about anxiety. I didn't even know that was a thing at that time. And I remember we were talking earlier about yoga, and I went to a yoga class, and I just suddenly felt a sense of calm. And then I heard this other thing that said, if you ever feel stressed or worried about something, try and think of a time when you felt calm. And I would always, in my mind, think of that yoga class that I did. And it was outdoors. And so it was a combination of being outdoors, surrounded by greenery, but doing a yoga practice that made me feel calm. And that then led me to take up yoga as a regular practice. And then actually I became a yoga teacher and I went through the full training. So through that, I feel like I've learnt to manage my stress better. And I also realised how I had let my work consume me. And because I have been so privileged to do work that I enjoy, that is meaningful and purposeful, I did become a workaholic. And because of the industry that I was in, it can be very all-consuming. So you become friends with your colleagues, and because you're in the theatre, you're working in the office in the daytime, but then there's stuff going on in the evening as well. So it's very easy to never go home. And so you're just working all the time, or you're surrounded by work. And so as I was going through my yoga training and obviously starting to dedicate more time to that, I realised that I needed to have more kind of discipline around how I was using my time, to sort of see work as part of my life and not everything. And so I guess that was sort of my introduction to understanding like how I can manage my own mental state and self-care.
It's interesting what you touch on there, and it's something that I heard recently, and I'm kind of coining under this term of like the self-development paradox, right? So there's, if you know Nicholas Taleb, he's an economist, and he once said that there's two types of people. There's people who know how to make money, and then there's people who don't know when to or how to stop.
I love
and
that.
then putting it in the context of self-development and kind of going back to the fact that you've always done something that you loved and driven by a purpose. There's this idea now that there's also another two type of people. There's people who don't know how to self-improve and self-develop, and then there's people who don't know how to stop. And I'm wondering whether you see that play out in either the people that you work with or in your own state, where in our own journey of finding out ways to find peace within ourselves and find ways to personally grow and our self-development, we forget to actually enjoy the process on our search to find that sense of enjoyment.
Interesting.
I think there's a really, I saw a great post, from a friend shared with me, because we kind of take the P out of in the gym at 4, drinking gallons of water, and there's some great memes on this, like, guys just like covering themselves, when you see those people that are, I am an early riser, right? Like, that's just like at the moment. Like 3 years ago, I wasn't, right? But the people that are going, I'm up at 5, I'm up at 4, I'm in the gym at 5, I'm in the office at 7, I'm doing this and doing that. Like, that's not healthy. That's not like, that's another form of unhealthiness. Like that unhealthy relationship with, doing everything. It's like, I remember when we first started, we've known each other for about 8 or 9 years through our consultancies. But when we, obviously when you're actually working in a business for someone, you get to know them really well. And I do triathlons and marathons. And Anwen said this kind of throwaway comment, but it's really stuck with me. She's like, "Oh, what are you running away from?" And I've been on, on runs with people who aren't there to enjoy it. Yeah. Right. They're like, they're tense and they're taut and they're like, they've got to do this. I must. And look, they're going to still be getting the benefits of the running. But yeah, I'm massively into this. But like, I don't believe in billionaires. I just don't think that needs to exist. Like, no one human being needs that, accumulate that amount of money, right? Like, I don't know what the threshold should be, but if you get to 50 or 100 million, like, just start giving it all away, or just start mobilizing it properly, or whatever, would be my experience. Like I say, I'm not anti-wealth, right? Yeah. But again, pinch it from Bartlett. He says, when he's talking to these successful people, and he's talking about himself, which I really like, that he's prepared to be vulnerable and go, "Oh, I'm definitely being dragged," and when am I enough? Yeah, because that's what we're really talking about, right? Is that in the work that Thrivall does, we talk about peak performance psychology, and we reference Team GB, right, the cycling Team GB, because it was Professor Stephen Peters of the Chimp Paradox that came into after. So there's a couple of things after 2008, leading into the London Games, and so we reference that because there's a lot of the stuff that Thrivall delivers is inspired by that, and and is informed by that. However, what we've discussed and what we're really is those absolute elite sports people, they're often not very well. Like they're not living out their best life. They haven't got, like, I'm painted with broad strokes here, but to have that kind of discipline to literally achieve at that level, like, almost everything has to go, right? And so I see that the same with business owners. And so, as impressive as seeing someone who's built a company and created jobs and this thing, and it's like great, like, I'm much more impressed with someone that says, I've been with my wife for 50 years. I've got a couple of wonderful children grown up, and now we've got grandkids, and we all get on really well, and and I'm there for other people, and I'm doing mentoring for free, and I'm like, that impresses me. Like they say, every billionaire is built off the backs of other people. Like, you have to tread on people, and I've met those people, right, in my corporate career, and it's one of the reasons I chose to leave a job that I really enjoyed. It's because there was a particular guy, and what would we'd say, he'd walk across dead bodies to get to a number, and that's not healthy either, right? And there's then humans become capital, which are expendable. But I love listening to Anwen talk about her career, with some jealousy in some ways, because I wasn't fortunate enough to know. And this is not a bring out the violins thing, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? I didn't have that calling or that kind of I just kind of, I always felt, I went to a grammar school, like basically everyone went to university, and for me, by the time I'd got to finished my levels, I was like, okay, I'm good with education now, but I've kind of had enough. But I'd got a Saturday job in a little Curry's High Street when I was 16, and so I just did that more. And then, by the age of 22, at that point, I was in Dixon's High Street. I don't know if you remember those. Yeah. Good. Okay, you're showing your age as well. And then people fall into retail. I fell into retail, but I loved it. I loved the pace of it. I loved dealing with people, both teams and the challenge of the general public. I loved the performance, because you're in electrical retail, so you got numbers to hit, and I just loved that kind of side of it. So for the literally 20 years, and Dixon's were incredible at training as well, right? So real investment in people. But can I tell the ER story? So this great thing where we're having a conversation with a store, an HR director, who's actually now on our advisory board, and we were talking about, the number of ER issues, and how to deal with them, and some of them can be so challenging, and kind of Anwen was just like, guys, what ER issues? And we were like, employee relationship, because it's a number, right, for every grievance, disciplinary and thing. And Anne was like, oh, right, yeah, okay. But being in an industry where most people are there, like in marketing, in theatre, or or the creative space, you were with art as well, weren't you? Like, most people are there because they want to be there, Whereas I was dealing with people like it's just a job,
right?
And so it's been, and do you know what? I love that part of that challenge, which was either to help people understand that they really don't like other people and they probably shouldn't be in retail. So perhaps we can help them find something else, and then kind of leads into your question. What kind of led me to Thrivall is, how can I really motivate and inspire someone to want to do a great job, and for me, leadership is the key to unlocking that, and being a servant leader, so they're in service to others, as the great Simon Sinek talks about, rather than you're here to serve me.
That really, sorry, were you going to add something else? I was just going to pick up on that. back to your point about whether you can get sort of hooked on the self-development tack, and in the same way that you can with making money, and to take it to the extreme, you can kind of go down the billionaire route. I think something that drives us and me is being driven by service for others. And I think kind of going back into my heritage, I suppose, in my family, I feel like that's been a theme, which I haven't really reflected on until you invited us onto this conversation today. But when I think about, you know, my parents, so although my mum didn't have a career as a stay-at-home mum, like she was there in service to her children and to the family. And, you know, her whole purpose has been around caring and creating a nurturing, loving family. And my dad has always been a public servant. So he's always worked in public sector roles. So, yeah, I think that sort of come through very strongly from him.
Grandma was a nurse.
Yeah, and obviously my grandmother was a nurse. My grandfather was in the military. So they've come from that service kind of perspective as well. Yeah. And then on my dad's side, my paternal grandfather was a trade union person. So he was very kind of, much championing people's rights in the workplace and creating work that is good for people. So I think that those things have definitely informed me and what I do. Yeah.
Where you are. I think it's really important that, so talking about kind of burnout, but we call it positive burnout, don't we? You're kind of like, because there's this kind of burnout, passion burnout. Passion burnout, rather than a toxic environment that just expects so much of you and just got to keep, you know, fear-led culture, all that horrible stuff. You know, actually, the companies that Thrivall talks to they still have burnout, even though they do great things and they're wonderful companies because of that positive burnout. So I was in that space. And I literally called up my regional manager, who's still a good friend of mine today, Nigel. I said, I can't do this anymore. I said, I'm just shattered. And he said, okay. He drove from the other side of London, literally put the phone down to me, he said, I'm coming over. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll come and see you. I literally stopped what he was doing, obviously picked up, drove the other side of London, came to me in South London. I said, right, let's go. He said, let's go for a walk. Like, what? Let's go for a walk. We just started walking. And there's a wonderful thing, isn't there, about having cadence and being able to walk and talk things through. And it just immediately settled me, because what I thought, you know, I'd got myself to this large, you know, I was running larger stores now. I'd got this kind of really good, had this really good career supporting my family, right? Which is, of course, you know, one of the reasons why I do what I do. And then I thought I was asking him to, you know, to demote me, essentially. I thought, I've worked, and that's what was really stressing me out, not just the fact that, you know, I was being overwhelmed. And he said these great words. He said, now's not the time to make a decision, Dan. He said, go and take some time off, and then we'll discuss it. I mean, what an amazing leader that guy was, you know, so supportive. So I had 6 days off. But I wanted to get back on the bike, right? Even though I knew I wasn't kind of fully ready. And when I was sharing this story with Anwen, she was like, oh, that's really interesting, because you would think it's good enough to have a great leader like Nigel, but actually that's not enough. You've got to have, the culture's got to be there, and it's got to be all leaders, right? And then that kind of links into 82% stat came out recently. 82% of managers are accidental managers in the UK. Yeah. So they've just fallen into a position, right? That's why 43% of people have left a job because of a manager. You know, people don't leave jobs, they leave people, right? Yeah. And then let's flip it on the other side and say, and Anwen found this great stat, which is 70% of managers feel ill-equipped to support their people. So actually they're not being trained, or they're not being supported. And so, or they're under great pressure. So they've not got the capacity to be the servant leaders that they need to be, right? And so that's kind of a really powerful piece that has informed Thrivall from, you know, back in COVID. I did that counselling certificate foundation course and found this thing called proactive counselling. I was like, wow, can you imagine? Like, we don't have to wait for people to be in crisis to benefit from counselling. If like all the managers or all the people in a business every other month had like just a one-to-one session with someone that can listen to them, support them, coach them if they're in a good place, or if they're having a life event, support them in that sense, to give them more capacity so they can be better leaders, so they can then be a better colleague to their other colleagues, communicate better because they've not got the weight of the world on their shoulders.
It's really interesting. I want to go back to something you said a bit earlier on about the, waking up at 4 a.m. because you want to, because it serves you productively. But then when you put this structure into place, which is, it definitely serves its benefits, right? Having that structure of this is what I'm going to do every day. But when people are driven to do that to a point where they lose the sense of enjoyment in what it's meant to bring out. Oliver Burkeman's got this term called productivity debt, and it's so interesting. And I could definitely see how I've done that in my life, and a lot of people probably would be able to say they've done something similar. You wake up to a to-do list, and the idea is there's a certain sense of like dopamine release when you cross something off the list, but you become so driven by that to-do list that what you're actually waking up with is you're starting your day at -10. And then what you're aiming to do is get to the end of the day where you feel satisfied that you have achieved enough that you can feel a sense of contentment for that day having been complete.
It's like the caffeine thing. Like if you drink too much caffeine, your standard rate, you've got to drink 3 coffees or whatever.
Your tolerance level
the
changes.
tolerance level, right? So you've got to have the coffee just to be normal.
To rebalance.
Exactly. And that's really interesting to think about that in the same of the endorphin hit from your to-do list.
Yeah. And so the flip side of that was trying to put into place this idea that rather than having a to-do list, as important they are, why not start the day with a blank piece of paper and that becomes your done list? So you're starting at the point of you don't need to, as helpful as it is, you don't have to get through a certain number of achievements in order to just feel like it's been a satisfactory day, or that you feel that you've earned the sense to be proud of yourself. But you start with
I've heard people call it, rather than a to-do list, you can have a ta-da list.
Okay.
So you get to the end of the year, the day or the week, or whatever, and you go, oh, ta-da! Look, these are all the things I have done.
Yeah.
Rather than I've started off with this intention of these are things that I'm going to do. It also makes me think of another thing that I heard. Rather than having a to-do list, you can have a to-be list. A good way to start the day is to think about, how do I want to be today? Like, how am I going to show up? And it's more thinking about your mindset and attitude, really. Yeah, so you can sort of think, how do I want to be in this meeting? How do I want to be when I go into this event? And that also makes me think of a Maya Angelou quote, which I love, which is, people don't remember what you said. Yeah. They remember how you made them feel. And so I think, it's really important just to be mindful of how we are being and not just how we're doing. And I think the shift that's happening at the moment with what they're calling the 4th industrial revolution is around AI coming in, automation, using technology to take on some of those kind of tasks.
As worker roles.
Yeah, and then that frees up humans to be more creative.
Entrepreneurial,
empathetic, more caring, and to maybe enjoy their lives more and to have more free time for self-development. And
not the unhealthy type.
I think it's just a really interesting time to be alive we're going through that shift. And I think Thrivall is there to sort of support people to be better, to think about how they're being in themselves.
And I think as you're talking about the to-do lists, what I'm minded of is purpose. But it's been really interesting, to have come from always doing work that I've really, really enjoyed. But when you have this thing called purpose, which is, Thrivall looks to make a really positive impact in the world, right? Because we fundamentally believe that when people have a better feeling of self-worth, that they can be more self-aware, therefore more aware of others, and then lead with kind of empathy and kindness in the world. And we know that makes for a like the science is out to prove that makes for a better world. So that is really exciting, because then actually to-do lists are almost irrelevant, because you're waking up every morning going, like, so we talk about creating a 100-year business, right? I don't know if you've heard this term, So it's like we're not looking for an exit. Like, we're not looking to, we're like, well, when we make this much money, it's like, what's the impact we're having on the world? Because we know that when we help, I don't like to put it that way, but when someone is on a Thrivall program, that they can be better within themselves, better partners, better fathers, better mothers and wives and husbands and stuff like that, because it is helping people thrive at work and beyond, that those people are probably closely connected to at least 5 people, right? So then that means that every 1,000 people that Thrivall works with, you're impacting the lives of 6,000 people. And then we're working with 1 million people, we're impacting the lives of 6. And that's pretty cool, right? And so what's really exciting about that, and that's backed up in this book that Anwen got me by June Oldman called Partnering, which defines the power of deep partnerships. It's that it's not about us. Like, it's never about us. So we can have the most impassioned disagreements and debates, but it doesn't matter. We don't fall out. We're not going to go and try and sue each other. We're not going to go, I deserve more shares than you, because it's not about us. It's about the mission that we're on and the purpose that we're here for. And so that's such a different thing.
One of the main things you focus on is this concept of burnout. And I like that spin on positive burnout. And there's this concept
passion
of
burnout.
Passion burnout.
Yeah, because I don't think any burnout is positive.
No, none of it is
Positive,
positive.
passion
burnout.
burnout. Yeah.
Burnout through passion, yeah.
But there's this way of looking at difficulty, and it's the idea that pressure and difficulty in itself isn't the issue. It's how we
respond.
Yeah, it's how we view and respond to it. I've heard that Chris Williamson give this example of, like, when you go to the gym and you lift really heavy, and if you've really pushed yourself by the end of the workout, or if you've done a run, you're sweating, you're dehydrated, maybe you've got that taste of like iron in your mouth because you've been pushing yourself too far and you feel faint. Knowing that it's off the back of putting in some kind of effort, it's all circumstantial. If you just felt like that when you woke up one day, or you walked outside the house and you felt like that, that's a kind of pressure, or that's a kind of adverse difficulty on yourself that doesn't have a justification. But as soon as it's like, okay, I've just done a 1-hour workout, I know where that pain has come from, it becomes justifiable that you want to experience that, because it leads to that next stage of growth. And I think
pain is weakness leaving the body, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's in service to a longer term goal, I guess, that you're working towards. It makes me think of, have you read the new Adam Grant book called Hidden Potential?
No, but I've
it's really good, like a really good read. And he really helped me reframe my perspective on success. And I think, kind of going back to my education, and my sort of natural ability kind of with academic studies, like, for me, success was getting A grades, and I'm just lucky that I was a student that was able to do that quite easily. So for me, that was success at that time. And for me, like, getting a B was like, oh, that's terrible failure. And sort of a loss of perspective, on that sort of thing. But that was sort of my measure of success, was like getting those grades and feeling that sort of sense of achievement, I suppose. But his whole book is around, actually, success is overcoming adversity and having resilience. And he was sort of saying that, really, rather than looking at someone's CV, if we're recruiting for a role, we shouldn't be looking for who's the most qualified, who's got the best grades, who's had the best career, the highest position in their last company.
Because that can be chance, can't it?
Yeah, it could be chance or privilege, which, certainly probably was a lot in my case. What we should really be looking at is, what difficulties have people had to overcome to get to where they are? And what adversity have they experienced? And really, if someone's just always been a straight A student, that's less impressive than somebody who started off as a D and got to a B.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be looking for.
It's what we call in football the MIP, the most improved player,
right,
rather than the most valuable player.
Yeah.
It's like who's really risen through the ranks.
Yeah.
And this kind of, I've had this reflection recently, and I often refer back to Sapiens by Yuval Harari, and recognizing that the form that we're in now is basically 70,000 years old. If you'd have asked me before reading the book, I'd have gone, we've been around for 15,000 years, in this kind of form. But no, like, literally, and 70,000 years ago, we're built to survive in tribes, right? So it's all about survival, and we weren't designed to have the easy life we have. And I use that, let me put some air quotes around that, in terms of how easy it is to survive, right? It was survival of the fittest, right, back then. And so I think my kind of own kind of realization is that human beings need two things. One is purpose, okay, and if that is as a mother raising children, if that is a father providing for your children, whatever that, or if that is building something, whatever your purpose is, you need a reason to get out of bed in the morning, okay? But you also need challenge, okay? And this has been borne out of by the idea that if everybody has everything given to them, that would be right. That would be a fair society. Like it just doesn't work for us evolutionarily. Like we're built to suffer and to strive, right? And being human is difficult. Like the human experience is hard work. And that ties into Mo Galdot's book, The Happiness Formula, which I think is so profound and relevant to the current generation, which is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but happiness equals where your expectation of life is met. And if you think, which I think a lot of people fall in the trap of, is that life should be easy, that life should be dancing around in fields of daffodils and kind of just having everything given to you, like you are going to be unhappy because we all know, and perhaps it's the privilege of being 45 years old, that life is difficult and life is hard and life can be a real struggle. And that's not being pessimistic. That's just what it is. And that's okay, right? And so if your expectation is there that life is tough, when you get up out of bed in the morning and you've got a tough day ahead of you, you're not perturbed by that. You're like, hello, I've been expecting you. But hey, guess what? When life is really good, it's huge gratitude around you. Like, things are going great. But then when it's even worse, it's not too bad because it's... Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's a common phrase like growth isn't born out of everything going your way. But it's a really interesting point you're mentioning because there's this other analogy of like where is it best to be on the ladder? At the top, at the middle, or at the bottom? And the answer is the one that's still climbing. Right, because as humans we're kind of drawn to anything that has a trajectory versus more than the status, right? And that's how we find our own self-fulfillment. So like you were saying about purpose, it's we are a lot more impressed by someone who's 150th and climbed to 13th, for example, than someone who's second and gone to third.
Yes.
What's the thing that we love in a sports thing? We love the the
underdog.
The underdog.
Yeah.
We love the underdog. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of Nike's behave like we're second.
Yeah,
It's the same thing, right? They're like, just because we're on top, the moment you're on top,
you become complacent, and you just need to always have that hunger. So I'm just thinking, people definitely need purpose, but maybe more than challenge, we need progress. And obviously challenge is part of that, but we need progression. And so going back to Thrivall, we work with the 5 ways to wellbeing as our framework, which is, if people want to look it up, it's as a framework that was developed by the New Economics Foundation think tank. It was commissioned by the government, and there's a whole load of research around it, looking at what influences our wellbeing. So it's sort of rooted in some really good science. And one of the pillars is keeping learning. So we know that there's evidence that shows that, we need to be progressing. We need to be learning, curious, open-minded and growing to feel a sense of well-being in ourselves.
which is really, we've inspired the Thrivall pillars of well-being, and the marketing strategist among us has named them all after M's, which I love, and I can remember them. So we called that one momentum, which I really like, and that's actually my favourite pillar because it's
moving forward.
about
that progress principle,
about moving forwards, and so our all of our training workshops are built around those, under those pillars, and it's about taking a company through all 5 of them, plus one, because they get one every other month throughout the whole year for that holistic approach. Again, it's that self-awareness when we're on the treadmill of life and we're kind of charging through. It's all too easy just to kind of, I'm feeling a bit. So when I do this talk with students, because I'm an enterprise advisor at secondary school, and I say, if you're ever feeling a bit meh, right, that kind of, like just look at your 5 ways and just like, is it because it's activity, it's being mindful, it's connection, it's learning
and having meaning and purpose.
Right? So those 5 things. So the amount of times that I've gone, just feeling like, so this week, been super, super busy, and I can see that I've not been I've not been able to get out on one of my runs. Connection's been great because I'm probably connecting with too many people, but it's just really interesting. You go, oh, okay, I can join the dots here, but you have to stop and you have to look.
And it's
at
about
those
balance.
things.
I think it's having
Correct.
a holistic approach. So going back to what we were saying earlier, like you can get too caught up in pursuing wealth, material wealth, or you can get too caught up on your own personal development for your own sake. And I think that's when we become unbalanced and we forget one of those pillars. And we can forget our higher purpose, which is about how we serve others.
But I think it's about, for us, we always come back to, why, what are you doing this for, and what's the outcome that you want. And so we've done, and I have to say, starting a new business while still running our other consultancies, we've had a challenge, but I always say, as tough as it gets, and anybody who started a new business will know, especially one that is kind of pioneering a new way of working. It has its own challenge, but what do I always say? Oh my God, it's going to taste sweet. In 10 years when we've got, we've grown it to make the impact that we want it to. And when we think about outcomes, it's really interesting to look at a lot of the comparators in our space, talk about it's wellbeing. So we'll sort out, we'll give you good wellbeing. And we ask the question, so what? Like what? What's that all about? So we much prefer talking about sustainable employment and this thing called creating sustainable employment. And there's two sides to that. That's one, as business owners and leaders, having a sustaining workforce that stay longer. You're not having to spend, recruit all the time, so you're losing less people. But on the other side, it's for the colleagues. The colleagues have got a sustainable work environment. So rather than going to work and feeling depleted, they're going to work and feeling resourced and filled up, and actually they can be better human beings. So for us, that's what we want to help companies deliver, which is for people and company. So there's a commercial reason for it. And we've built these pillars, these foundations. So we think that's with good mental health, good well-being, great leadership, and peak performance psychology. So there for us are the four pillars that we know the Thrivall program delivers for. And I think it's really important to again think about the holistic.
I love that point you were making on starting the business and seeing that kind of, I've got this optimism for that 10-year vision, because I think there's the optimistic approach and the pessimistic approach. And when you sit on either extreme, both are as dangerous as each other. And so there's this, just the concept of like the rational optimist. And that's someone who,
I
am. You can apply that in relationships, you can apply that in finance, in business. It's the idea that I have it in me to bear the short run hurdles and bumps that are going to come because I know that long run's going to come. So it's the idea that the rational optimist is someone who is optimistic in the long run, but
that's me.
Can bear the pessimism
100%.
That's going to come.
Another
in the
phrase
process.
that I heard was prepare for the worst, but hope for the best.
Yeah.
And that's me. Like I always want to be prepared. I'm always rehearsing scenarios for worst case scenarios so that I'm prepared for that and I can deal with anything. Like I 100% believe that I can literally deal with anything. Nothing phases me.
What's your thing? If you dream it and you can achieve it, kind of thing.
And that as well. I do believe.
If you can, but I think what we're really good at is, I'm probably more lean on the over optimistic.
Idealistic, maybe.
I don't know. No, I would say. But what I'm not going to fall into the trap of is being blinded by belief, right? That. It will work. It's like you need to have a critical thinker, but also I do that with myself, so I'm, it's about having utter belief in what you're doing. And so for me, there is, I think Bartlett says, there is no plan B. Like the moment there's a plan B, the moment you don't think it will work, then you might as well pack it in. So for me, of course it will work. However, you have to also say, if it's not working by X, like, don't flog the dead horse, right? And I think that's really important, because I've seen people, burn money, create debt when they should have just got out. So it's having that kind of critical friend, and I have one of those sat next to me.
Thank you guys so much.
Critical thinker. Sorry, I called you a critical friend.
No, but that critical friend is a thing as well. Yeah.
But in a positive way.
Yeah.
I don't see it. I just think it's a really useful.
Yeah, board members are often called critical friends. Yeah.
And we have a very quick closing tradition on the show, which is we asked the guests to say that if they could leave just one message, so one sentence on a piece of paper that will be passed on to the future generation, that they'll read and live by that, what would that sentence be?
Oh, wow. You go first.
Yeah, I've
have
got
to
one.
think.
So I would leave the quote, a quote by Viktor Frankl. He's worth looking at. And he says this wonderful thing: between stimulus and response, there is a space, and it is in that space that we find our freedom. And I think that is such a, and you know, I'm still working desperately at trying to do that, but the amount of times that, and we've got all this stuff going on inside of us from our upbringings, from our defense mechanisms and everything like that. So when someone says something to us that kind of hits, we'll often just respond to that stimulus without thinking how we're responding. And so, but there is a space, there's a gap, and if we can largen that gap between just responding and going, hold on, you know, I think we'll have better relationships, and the world will be a better place.
Mine would be something like, when all is sort of said and done, love is the only thing that really is left behind. So I think, so going back to the Maya Angelou quote, people don't necessarily remember what you've said or things that have happened. They remember how you made them feel. And I think, when people leave this earthly realm, really all that is left is the kind of love that you had with those people.
Love and support,
So yeah, that's why I think it's important to invest in love, whether that's through your family or through your work or through your community.
Remember how you made people feel.
Yeah.
Love that.
And only love is real at the end of the day.